So, Chapter 10, E-commerce, Digital Markets, and Digital Goods. I think e-commerce is an interesting topic. This is really kind of a surface level discussion, but definitely touches on the major stuff. So this chapter, what are the unique features of e-commerce, digital markets, and digital goods? So we'll talk about that. You can't market everything on the internet. Well, you can, it works a little bit differently than it does when we talk about traditional markets. What are the principal e-commerce business and revenue models? How do you make money? Because that's really kind of the end game. If you're not making money, there's not much sense in doing it. So when we talk about that, we'll talk a little bit about the dot-com bust and some of that. How has e-commerce transformed marketing? Marketers, they don't get to do what they used to do. It's changed how they work. You look at a lot of business, things like finance or accounting, in a lot of ways, other than specific guidelines that they have to adjust for, their rules haven't changed all that much. They do the same thing that they've been doing for the last 100 years, 1,000 years. You count how many products you got, you count how many you sold, and you keep track of stuff like that. How has e-commerce affected business-to-business transactions? We tend to think of, as consumers, when we hear about e-commerce, we think about us. We're us-centric. That's who we are. So we think about dealing with Best Buy or Walmart and buying things online. And that's the consumer-to-business or business-to-consumer market. And that's a relatively small area of e-commerce. So we'll talk about that a little bit because business-to-business is where the money's at. What is the role of m-commerce in business, and what are the most important m-commerce applications? We'll talk about that a little bit. We just saw the video over that. Hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of some of the things that are in play. And then what issues must be addressed when building an e-commerce website? You can't just slap something up, but you can just go out of business too. So it talks about For Food. It's a burger joint in Manhattan of all places. I was in Manhattan a few years ago. My sister lives there, and I've never had, before I went there, a $20 hamburger, but they've got them. And it was a really good burger, but I never before could have seen me paying $20 for a hamburger. But being a restaurant in Manhattan, I mean, you've got a lot of competition. There are restaurants everywhere in Manhattan. They're all over the place. So how do you, as a burger joint, how do you get business? Well, their approach to it was, let's use social networking to really get the word out, to try to build a community of people that are interested in us as a company. And so that's exactly what they did, tried to make it easy for people to order online, tried to build a buzz around their name. Now obviously that creates, if they can do something like that effectively, that creates interest, initial interest. They've got to follow through with good service and a good product and things like that. But it's a way to get people excited about your brand, about your company. So it helps to illustrate that information systems can be used for new products, new services, new product launches, and things like that. The social networking is a really powerful tool. It really is. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the lecture. E-commerce today, use of the internet and web to transact business using digitally enabled transactions. Sounds simple enough. Exchanging, product, services with digital transactions, some kind of payment across the web. Began in 95, thereabout roughly. What else started around 1995? What was the big product that was launched in 1995? Windows 95. It really changed the desktop operating system. Apple was around, and the Windows GUI was around before that too. But Windows 95 really changed the major portion of the market that was the PC. And it was very user-friendly. It was very easy to get online. It had the network operating system built into it as part of the operating system. So now you could get online easily. It was very point-and-click. It was much more user-friendly than the stuff that you had before that. And you had the web browser that came out a couple of years before that. So things were really starting to get much more point-and-click. What's that mean? More user-friendly. Easier for non-technical people to be able to use it. So grew exponentially, still growing even in the recession that we have now, or the kind of slow times that we have now. It still continues to grow. In the dot-com bust era, it continued to grow, and we'll talk about that a little bit more too. So this bubble that we had, it kind of depends on how you want to look at it. Companies that survived that bubble now are thriving. E-commerce revolution is still in its early stages. It's changing even today. It's not a mature market, and it'll probably, because of the nature of the beast, will probably never be a mature market because everybody's always trying to one up each other. The growth of e-commerce, if you look at it, right in here was the dot-com burst. It continued to grow in terms of revenue. It continued to grow right in that dot-com burst. The book doesn't have the figures for it, but I've read another figure that showed the investment in e-commerce. So from the business's perspective, of investing in e-commerce applications and hardware, that the amount of money that was spent the 3 years following the dot-com bust versus the 3 years prior to the dot-com bust was double. So everybody, all these companies, these fabulous dot-com companies that went out of business in that dot-com bust right there, they were basically bad ideas to begin with. People didn't give up on the dot-coms at that point. In fact, they invested even more money. So what happened was you had this era of irrational exuberance here in the mid to late 90s. If you put .com at the end of your name, people threw money at you. It was great if you were one of those fortunate few. But that irrational exuberance wasn't really backed up by a lot in many cases. And so what happened with the dot-com bust, people kind of retracted a bit and said, okay, we've still got money. It's still a viable technology. We believe it to be anyway. But before we give you money, just you .com you, whoever you happen to be, we want to see a business plan. Or we want to see your market projections. We want to see something with some real numbers, some real thought behind it. How are you going to get to an era of prosperity? And that was the real key. So you saw companies like Walmart, big company. First thing they did, they jumped out there. They developed a website, and they couldn't make it work. Walmart couldn't make it work. So they took down their site for a period of time, and they actually contracted out to have their site developed outsourced and had it developed for them. And now they operate. It's a very successful site. They make a lot of money with it. But they couldn't, in the early days of the internet, corporations, especially the bricks and mortar stores, had a hard time figuring out how they were going to marry their physical stores with their online stores and how they were going to make that process work. Even, the last couple of years when we had a little bit of a slowdown in the economy, growth in terms of e-commerce went relatively flat, whereas traditional commerce declined. So it's really done very well relative to commerce in general. Why is e-commerce different? Well, there's a few features about e-commerce that make it unique relative to the way we used to do business. The ubiquity, it's everywhere. It's on all the time. It doesn't go to sleep. It doesn't work in shifts. It doesn't have a union. It just continues to work, take orders. So it's everywhere. Middle of the night, you come home, you can place that order. Global reach, you can find suppliers all over the place. You can find businesses all over the place. You want to order stuff, if it's online, you can find it. Universal standards. We've had e-commerce for a long time. We'll talk about EDI here in a little bit. But e-commerce has been around a long time if you look at it from that perspective. But standards, things like the internet with TCP/IP, means that everybody can participate. Whether you're a poor college student or you're a Fortune 500, you're the government, doesn't really matter. Everybody can participate because of those standards. The richness. Again, in the early days of the internet, that was a big knock. People tried to sell clothes on the internet. And the thing was, who buy clothes on the internet? You can't try them on, you can't feel them. And, everybody knows that one size is different from one place than to another. Same thing with cars. You want to drive a car. You want to feel it. How does it ride? How does it feel? How's the stereo sound? Things like that. So that was a real knock on the internet in the early days. And it still is to a degree. But it's come a long way. Don't you agree? We've got video now. We can watch people try on a piece of clothing or model it. We can zoom in. We can rotate things. We can hear things. There's a lot of different things that we can do on the internet.
Test drive cars and die, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. You don't get the look and feel, but again, it's the same kind of thing that you get to do an awful lot more than what you could originally. You can look, you can sit in the car and you can look around and say, okay, that's where the buttons are. That's where the sunroof is. I know when I shop for cars, I go on the internet, and I love my sunroof. I absolutely love my sunroof. First thing I look for is for a sunroof. You ever look through the specs for the car? They're not right. Half of them, some of them are right, some of them are wrong. I don't trust that. I go to the pictures and look for a sunroof. That's the first thing I do. So it's very rich compared to what it was in the early days. It's come a long way. Interactivity, that richness, you need that interactivity to be able to really enjoy that richness, to be able to play the songs, to be able to interact back and forth with websites. Information density, and we'll talk about this a little bit more too. Information density, we start talking about price transparency, cost transparency. It basically means that it's kind of an even playing field. In the old days, before the internet, if you went to buy a car at a dealership, they had something you didn't have. They knew how much that car cost. You were negotiating with an unknown cost for that car. You had no idea where the floor was for that dealer. So they had an advantage over you. With the internet, now you can find out all this information before you ever go to the dealer. You know exactly what that car costs the dealer. So if you've got that information and they've got that information, you're both working from a level playing field. If they say they can't go lower because their cost is at a higher level, you know they're not being very truthful with you. Maybe you want to go to another dealer. So it gets rid of some of that disparity. The ability to personalize and customize. So you can get unique messages. You can get unique messages to certain customers, certain groups of customers. You can customize marketing messages and things like that as a retailer. Social technology, promoting user content generation and social networking. Get users to write back about their experience purchasing this particular product, or how they enjoyed this movie or that movie. I Skype a lot. After a lot of calls, I get a little pop-up box. How was your call? How was the audio? How was the video? Things like that. Same thing with Netflix. Periodically, I'll get an email that says, you recently watched this movie. How was the quality of the video? So they can try to use that information to improve their services. So you get a lot of from their customers. It makes it very easy to get feedback and improve the quality of your service. Key concepts in e-commerce. Digital markets reduce information asymmetry, that difference in information that one group has over another. If everybody's operating from a level playing field, it makes negotiations a lot more fair. A lot more fair. It reduces search costs. You don't have to wait for a catalog to come in the mail. You don't have to call all these various places and wait on hold for the salesperson to get back to you. Things like that. You can do all that searching yourself, especially with things like some of the automated tools that you can evaluate multiple products at one time on the internet. I use Price Grabber all the time. It's a nice little tool. You can look at for one product across various retailers. It's a nice way to compare various features. Reduce transaction costs. The book talks about, for a large corporation, the average transaction cost is around $100. That's fine if you're ordering a bomber. But if you're trying to order a box of paper clips, $100 to order a box of paper clips is probably a little excessive. Internet transactions tend to be much less expensive to be able to do. And then menu costs. Anybody know what menu costs are? Menu costs are the costs associated with changing your prices. On the internet, it's really easy. You change the price in a database, that price is reflected on your website, assuming your website's drawing from the database. That price is reflected on your website. It's reflected in any of your applications that are using that database as its data source. So it's very quick and efficient to be able to change that price. I used to live in Montague County, and I would drive down to Denton County where I go to school and work. It's a pretty good drive, so I had to gas up a lot. And one place I'd always gas up because it was a bakery too, and I like buns. And I would always gas up there. And I noticed one day that they changed the sign. The out the old sign and put up a digital sign. And I talked to them about it, and I said the reason they did that was the guy was losing money on gas because gas prices were changing so often. He was lazy, something he and I shared. He wouldn't go out there and change the price immediately. And so he'd start, a few days would go by, and he'd end up losing money on the gas because the price changed. He switched over to a digital sign so that he could change it remotely every day. So it made it much quicker, much easier. He was trying to reduce his menu costs. Digital markets enable price discrimination, dynamic pricing, and disintermediation. When we talk about dynamic pricing and price discrimination, these are different ways of looking at charging different groups of people or different segments different prices. Think about going to Six Flags in the summertime. It's 110 degrees outside. Is a Coke from the Coke machine worth $1 to you or $5 to you? The hotter it gets, the more valuable that Coke is to you. Well, a few years ago, they actually thought about using these techniques to, based on the temperature, charge you an increased price. That didn't go over that well. But it does go over well in certain industries. Think about the airline industry. Not everybody pays the same price for an airline ticket for the same flight. It doesn't happen. As that flight gets closer and closer to taking off, they're willing to sell that ticket for cheaper and cheaper. Why? Because they don't get anything out of that empty seat. They're going to use roughly the same amount of fuel. They want somebody in that seat. But at the same time, if they can get you to purchase early, now they can charge different prices to different groups. Disintermediation. Anybody know what that is? That's an e-commerce term that's been thrown around for quite a few years. And now you're starting to see some people back off of the term because it doesn't mean quite what people thought it should mean. What disintermediation means, it's the removal of certain parties from the supply chain. It's the idea of buy it directly from the manufacturer, get a better price, right? Get rid of the distributor, get rid of the retailer. We'll go directly to the manufacturer as a customer and we'll get a better price, right? That's the side that the book presents, and there is an element of truth to that. What they don't talk about is that there's actually the case for re-intermediation or reintroduction or keeping certain intermediaries in this process. It turns out for the manufacturer, in some cases, in this model up here, maybe they have 5 distributors and they sell 100,000 product to 5 distributors. Well, it's a pretty easy transaction. The manufacturer doesn't have to staff this huge sales department. So the manufacturer may want a distributor in the supply chain. Down here, if you've got that 100,000 customers, now they've got to have a much larger sales force as a manufacturer to deal with the customers. So there are certain services that intermediaries introduce into the supply chain. So there's a reason to have intermediaries in some instances. It's not always the case. But the initial promise of the internet was we were going to get rid of all these middlemen, so to speak. And it was going to drive prices down to bare minimums. And that has been true in some cases, but it's not always true. So keep that in mind. Key concepts in e-commerce. The idea of digital goods. That's what we're focusing on. Now, it turns out you can do a lot of things with respect to e-commerce that don't relate to e-commerce, or don't relate to digital goods. Certainly you can advertise, you can promote products, you can provide product information, which allows people to research their products before they go into a physical store and make a purchase. But this chapter really focuses on digital goods, things that you can deliver on the internet and receive payment for on the internet. So digital goods are goods that can be delivered over a digital network, things like music, videos, e-books, things that you can translate into some kind of digital form and transmit. What distinguishes a digital good from a physical good in one respect is where the costs are borne. With digital goods, all the cost is in the production, the initial production. You make that song, and that song's produced. You don't have to reproduce it again for the second time, for the third time, for the fourth time. You just make a copy, and that's virtually free. As opposed to making a car, yeah, there's a lot of development costs in designing and building that first car, but there's still substantial cost in building that second car, that third car, that fourth car. there's still a lot of costs in it. So that's a distinguishing factor. Costs of delivery over the internet are very low, virtually free again. Marketing costs remain about the same. There's not a lot of difference between marketing, a digital product versus marketing a physical product. You can do both on the internet. You can do both through traditional marketing outlets. So it really kind of depends on the product and what your approach to marketing is. Industries with digital goods are undergoing revolutionary changes. They're trying to figure out the best ways to market things. And you look at some of these industries, publishers, record labels. Record labels, I would argue, have already gone through this. Their industry is significantly different than what it was just a few years ago. Napster took care of that for everybody. But you're seeing now the video industry going through that. Hollywood's trying to figure out what's the best way to make sure we don't lose out to pirators. The book industry, same thing. Publishers, same kind of thing. How do we make sure that we get that our authors get paid, that we as a publishing company get paid, we make our money? So you're seeing some of these markets, some of these industries change. And we can talk about e-commerce from a number of different perspectives. And one of the ways is we can look at the model of who the participants are. So business to consumer, again, this is what I talked about a little bit ago of us. It's us-centric. Who are we dealing with? We're dealing with businesses. As glamorous as that is, and that's where all the nice fancy stuff is in terms of what you see, the pictures, and being able to rotate and see video and all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of emphasis on that in this particular market, but not necessarily in this market. Because as a business, you're more interested on the technical details. You want some pictures, that makes things nice, but the flash isn't necessarily as important. But this is a huge business segment. It's a huge segment. That's where the vast majority of e-commerce dollars are exchanged. You've also got the consumer-to-consumer market. Can anybody think of an example of that? There's one really big one. eBay. Gold star.
It was just turned into B to consumer.
Yeah, it's turned into B2C. And some people would say that it's that even if it is a consumer, even if it is how you're thinking of consumer to consumer, that it's really just a B2C. Even as an individual, some people would argue that even as an individual, if you're selling something, you become a business. Certainly when you're selling 10,000 of them a month, I think you probably should be a business, but that's for a different argument. And then mobile commerce, and we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end. Some of the e-commerce business models are here, and it just really sort of depends on what you want to do with your e-commerce site. You look at something like a portal. What's a portal?
Access point.
It's an access point. Where's it going to, well, we'll talk, no, let's slow that up. Where's it going to get its money from? How's a portal going to make money?
It's simply just giving you one other option toward that product or service.
Give me an example.
H&R Block still has their options all over town. If you want to buy it on the to the online option.
Okay. I would say they're probably a transaction broker.
Okay.
Think about Yahoo as an access point. If Yahoo, how does Yahoo make money? Advertising. Google, same thing. Vast majority. Google's really only more of a portal if you set up the various widgets. Usually a portal is a gateway, and you'll have various features on there. But in addition to those features, things like stock prices and weather and things like that. In addition to that, you have usually a search engine behind it, and ads. And that's how portals usually make their money. E-tailers, online equivalents to our retailers. Content providers, people that are providing content. Newspapers, for example. YouTube, another good example. Transaction brokers, somebody that's facilitating transactions, stockbrokers, for example. Market creators, eBay, somebody who creates a location for the exchange of two different groups. They're not really doing the transaction, although they are taking a cut. In that sense, they're kind of like a broker, but service providers, and community providers. I'm going to come back to this one. This is the one that we're going to do. It's on page, I looked it up this time, 385 through 387. We'll come back to this in a second because I think the next slide is important for that. E-commerce revenue models. Again, it's all about money. You've got to make money. Even if you're on the web, you know, and you're worth a lot of money. Think Facebook. Facebook, there's an example for the discussion board this week. What does it say that they're estimated to be worth? Like $55 billion or something like that? But their revenues are only approaching $1 billion per year? I don't know. There's something not quite right there. There's just something not quite right there. Maybe they'll get it figured out. I'm sure they probably will. So different ways to make money. Advertising is a big one. That's the big one on the internet. Various ads. So those banners that you see, emails that you get, things like that. Sales. So Amazon, represent them. Subscription services. Netflix. You pay that monthly fee. They don't care whether you watch any of it. Pardon? E-magazines. Yeah, e-magazines, exactly. Free and premiums. I'm not a big fan of those sites. Those are sites that typically have a certain amount of contents or a certain amount of content for free, and then for a premium price you can get additional content. Transaction fee, where you don't have to, you have access to the site, but limited access to the site. For an additional fee, you can get, download that particular white paper or something of that nature. And then affiliate programs. Amazon does some of that, where if a site refers you to Amazon and a purchase is made, that site gets a kickback. They get a certain amount of money or a cut of the profit, or cut of the transaction. In a lot of cases, organizations that are running e-commerce sites will use one of these or a combination of these. So in a lot of cases, you'll see a combination between subscription and free or freemiums, or sales and advertising. You'll see a combination of the two. And usually when you see an e-commerce company that fails, it's usually because they picked one of these and it didn't work out really well. And in some cases, you'll see their revenue model change. It's a recognition that it's not working out right. So it's something that you do occasionally witness. So at this point, I wanted to stop and go ahead and give you guys an opportunity to go through that case. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. So what did you guys come up with the first one? Based on your reading of this chapter, how would you characterize Twitter's business model?
We would characterize their business model as both a community provider and a content provider. Primarily a community provider, which provides an online meeting place where people of similar interests can communicate and find useful information. And they make the money side of their business model.
That's the next question.
Oh, never mind.
The revenue model is the next question. But yeah, they don't actually create content, but they provide content. And that's the beauty of the model. They don't have to do anything. They're just a shell of a company that just they take stuff that people are giving to them for free, and they put it in a format that's easily read and consumed by other people that don't have a life or something. Sorry, I should have said that. I don't completely understand tweeting, so I understand it. I just don't understand the appeal of it. So group 2. If Twitter is to have a revenue model, which of the revenue models described in this chapter would work?
We chose advertising just so Twitter has a way to make money.
I think anybody else come up with anything different? What you guys started to answer that?
Advertising.
That's what you thought too. I was doing some looking around. Obviously, the book is. I don't care if the date on that says next year. Ads. That's what it looks like. The direction that they are going, as far as their revenue model, promoted tweets or ads. Basically, where they would get money from companies. Companies would pay money to bump up their tweets so that people would be more likely to see their tweets than other people's tweets. Which one, of the various revenue models, it's kind of hard to say which would work. The book talks about maybe doctors' offices and things like that. Maybe they'd be willing to pay a premium to let customers know, hey, I've got an opening, for an appointment at this time if you can make it, or blocks of time. Maybe they would be willing to do that. Maybe they wouldn't. Maybe restaurants or something like that. I don't know. I think those types of revenue streams are going to be difficult for them to implement. Certainly the book talked about one that I think is extremely valuable, all that real-time data that they have with respect to customers. They know where they're tweeting from and they know what they're tweeting about. And there's a lot of rich data in that if they could somehow turn into marketing data, it'd be valuable to people. But they've got to be careful for the very same reasons that Facebook had to be careful in the online discussion. There's that privacy policy, and they can't violate that, or they can, but find themselves in court. Group 3, what is the most important asset that Twitter has, and how could it monetize this asset?
We thought about it uses the trends, promotional tweets, and other than that, the real-time information that they get. I think that's the biggest asset because they can use it. That's the best way to advertise as well, and according to that, it's got deals with Google, Yahoo, and all the search engines as well.
I agree. I think those are the two biggest assets that they have. The data that they have and name recognition. They're a hot commodity, or at least have been. I heard you guys talking a little bit. That may be waning. It's kind of a hard market to be in. It's one of those things you got to strike while the iron is hot. And I'm not so sure that they're capitalizing as best they could as quickly as they probably should be. So they may find themselves in trouble here if they can't figure out some way to make enough money pretty quickly. They mentioned something in the book about being valued at $1 billion now. That's a lot of money for 140 characters. Group 4, what impact will high customer churn rate have on Twitter's potential advertising revenue?
I don't think we don't think that will impact that much on the advertising revenue because the churn rate is it's high, but at the same point of time, they have more and more customers, linking to Twitter, and joining the network. And if there are some giant companies like Dell and Amazon and something like trying to sell their products, advertisements and everything, I think it will attract customers.
Yeah, I think some of it depends on exactly what they mean by churn rate. If they're talking about in terms of participating, if customers are simply not posting very often, a significant portion of them, that's one thing. But if they're following celebrities, for example, a lot of people following Stephen Colbert. People do. I don't know why, but they do. Isn't he enough on TV? That's it. So if they could take advantage of that, people will follow his tweets. They might be able to take advantage of some type of ad revenue model based on that. The people following his tweets, maybe you follow up his tweets with some type of ad or something like that. But as far as if they're talking about people that are actually leaving altogether and not following tweets at all anymore, that's off. The 30% is pretty big. That's kind of hard to, if you're constantly turning over customers. Remember, we talked about the expense of getting new customers. Eventually, you run out of new customers. You just do. So, I thought that was an interesting one to go over. So, thank you. Okay, so there we did that. Okay, so what is it that makes e-commerce really attractive or really work? Well, it's really Web 2.0. Remember we talked a little bit ago about, in the early days of the internet, the lack of rich content. You didn't have video. You didn't have the ability to communicate back and forth in a rich way with the website, with chat and like I said, seeing products that you could rotate and change colors and things like that. So Web 2.0 is really what facilitates all that. And that helps us with things like social networking. So those social networks allow us to get together with a group of friends and talk about places we've been, talk about products that we've bought that we really like, talk about things that we don't like. And there's a lot of rich information in that. You end up seeing social sites actually, social shopping sites actually pop up, which is kind of just an extension of a social networking site. Sites that are dedicated to shopping, sites that are getting friends together and, hey, there's a sale here, let's go there. And there's certain types of products that are great. And you can talk about those products, evaluate those products, and kind of push them to your friends. If you're a business, that's great. You're not advertising. Your friends are doing it for you, or your customers are doing it for you. Works under this idea of the wisdom of crowds, and it works both ways. We tend to trust other people. We trust our friends. Our friends' opinions are valuable. We tend to trust them more than we do, say, an advertising firm for a company. At the same time, so even though we trust our friends, we take their advice, we're more likely to go out and buy something that they recommend. At the same time, from a retailer's perspective or from a business's perspective, they get a lot of information back from these social shopping sites. They get a lot of information about what's being said about their products. What is it that's good? What is it that's bad? How do they do more of the good, do less of the bad? There's a lot of really good information about their products and services that they can enrich. You also have, again, because of Web 2.0, prediction markets that come out. People place bets online, for example. Peer-to-peer betting markets on specific outcomes, elections, sales figures, all kinds of stuff. I've got a group that I'm in right now on ESPN for NFL Sunday. Pick who the winners are. And it's kind of interesting because the lady that's winning it right now, and I'm not trying to be sexist or anything, she knows football. But all she does is it shows you the consensus. And it shows you each game and the two teams that are playing, and it shows you who the consensus is, the consensus pick. All she does is pick the consensus pick, with the exception of the Cowboys. And so on that game, she tends to lose a lot. But other than that, she's winning consistently every week. Good for her. My mother-in-law, so I have to give her props. We won't worry about that one. That's the discussion topic. E-commerce marketing. We talked about earlier in the introduction how e-commerce has really changed the marketer's role. I mean, before you had your salesmen, you had catalogs, you had direct mail, things like that. You had television and radio ads. Very basic kinds of advertising that most people were familiar with. There were costs that were associated with each one. You knew that radio you could reach within a region a lot of people relatively inexpensively. Same thing with newspaper. Cheaper, a lot of people within a region. If you wanted to reach a lot of people over a large area, you went to television. It's really expensive. Internet provides marketers with new ways of identifying and communicating with customers, though. Why? Because now you can reach millions and millions and millions of people very, very cheaply. Not only that, you can customize your message. You can have a unique message to groups or to individuals because of all that marketing data that we've collected. You can identify individual users or individual groups of users and send targeted emails to them. Or when they access your site, if they're a registered user, when they log in, you know who they are. You know that this is an affluent customer who's made big purchases before. You push certain types of vacation packages or certain types of vehicles towards them. Versus another customer who shops less frequently, perhaps is less affluent. You push different deals to them in order to try to get them to make those purchases. There's this idea of behavioral targeting. The idea is that your actions on the web can be did I start that? Your actions on the web can be monitored and evaluated. You make certain clicks. You go to a website, and I'll come back to this in just a second. You go to a website and you make this first click. When you make that click, it's at a certain time of the day, right? Well, that tells that company something about when you're shopping. What you clicked on tells them something about what you're interested in. The type of product, the color, the size, things like that. Did you finish the purchase? That's what they want. You know, they made a sale, great. But if you didn't, what happened? Did you just close the page? Maybe there's something wrong with the site design. It's confusing, perhaps. So you can look at that. So just your behaviors on a company's website can give them a lot of information as far as how you behave. Advertising formats include search engines, display ads, rich media, email. So there's a lot of ways to do it. I'm not going to worry about that one. Related to this idea of behavioral marketing, it's not, or actually it's an extension to what we were just talking about. It's not just a case of looking at your reactions or your behavior on a particular website. There are certain technologies that they can monitor your behavior across multiple websites. And the big example of that is DoubleClick. And DoubleClick got in a lot of trouble here a few years ago. They huge company, or a company with a huge amount of data on users. And basically what they do is they place cookies on your machines. And those cookies are placed there by ads. They put a cookie in an ad. And you go to various websites that have these ads, and because those are DoubleClick ads, that cookie can be read. Well, with that reading that cookie, now they can identify what site you're on, how long you've been there, what site you came from, what site you're going to, assuming you click a link. So there's a lot of information that they can get about you from outside of a particular website, across websites now. Well, Google bought, for that, they got in a lot of trouble because one of the things that they had wanted to do was they were going to buy an offline marketing firm's data. And what that was going to allow them to do was actually be able to merge those two pieces of data, or those two databases, and take all that clickstream data that they had collected and identify you as a specific user with this other data set. So now they're going to have a lot of very rich data. It's going to be a very expensive deal. They got enough public backlash that deal didn't go through. But it also raised the eyebrow of Google. Google thought, this is there's a lot of potential here. So Google ended up buying DoubleClick. So with the way DoubleClick works, like I said, you go visit a member network, which is thousands and thousands and thousands of different websites. You go visit them, they put a cookie on your machine. You're going to see it in the form of an ad. When you go visit another member network, that other website is going to access that very same cookie, update the information, and now they're starting to track you, what sites you've been on, again, how long you've been on the site, on a particular page, things like that. So it gives them a very rich data set regarding your behavior. And I mentioned earlier that there's the idea that e-commerce has been around a very long time, and it has. Companies, especially in the 50s and 60s, started getting large enough, realizing that $100 per transaction, this is killing us. We've got to figure out a way to address that. And these large corporations did with the advent of EDI, electronic data interchange. And it's the idea that we're going to move a lot of the transactions that we used to do via the mail into an online environment. So invoicing, shipping bills of lading, sending a check. If we can put those in some kind of an electronic form, we can speed up the process. We can reduce a lot of costs by doing that. Large corporations could do that. That's what EDI was about. What was the real kicker about that? The real problem with EDI was because it was proprietary, the only companies that would really do it were the big companies. They were the only ones that really had the resources to develop communication standards, to lease the lines from their corporation to the other corporations that were going to participate. And everybody that was going to participate had to have the software, had to have the hardware to be able to participate. So there were no standards except the standards that were developed by the individual companies. So it was a lot of startup costs to be able to get involved into EDI. So that's basically how it worked. You could share shipping data, payment data, production and inventory requirements. You could share a lot of that stuff automatically. The internet, before we get to this, the internet really helped to change all that. It basically allowed you to move the concept of EDI to the internet with standards. And so now all of a sudden the little guy could get in on the act. You could make payments across the internet. You could send invoices and emails and stuff like that across the internet to to facilitate that trade. So it allowed the concept of EDI to spread across large and small businesses alike. Let's go back to business a little bit. There's different, again, we want to focus on business to business because that's the biggest part of the pie. It's a huge area of e-commerce, and that's where the bulk of the money goes. There's different types of networks or exchanges, if you will, when we talk about business to businesses, e-commerce. Private industrialized networks, large firm uses an extranet to link its suppliers and distributors and other key partners. So you basically you end up with a big player in the market that's going to set up an extranet to allow this communication to go back and forth and facilitate trade between the one corporation and the various suppliers together, and those downstream as well. So it might look something like that, where you've got the big player that's sitting there in the middle. That's going to be one player that happens to be in the industry already. It's a little bit different, we'll talk about here in just a second. Net marketplace is a single market for many buyers and sellers. This is usually where you'll have multiple players within the industry that will come together and create a market space together. So rather than having a single player creating a market space, you'll have multiple players, multiple groups within an industry get together and create this marketplace for really the same kind of purpose, to facilitate trade, to facilitate an e-commerce environment between these particular groups. So you might see something like that. And again, this net marketplace would be multiple corporations paying for this. And then you end up with exchanges. Exchanges really didn't work out all that well. Exchanges are typically set up by some kind of a third party. And a third party creates this market space to try to do the exact same things that we've already talked about. Connect thousands of suppliers and buyers for spot purchasing. Typically provide vertical markets for direct goods for single industry, food or electronics, things like that. A lot of them failed. The problem was it created a really competitive bidding process in this particular environment, where buyers were trying to buy, the sellers really weren't interested in participating because the buyers are only looking for the cheapest price. So it's driving prices down to the point where if I'm a seller, I'd rather go to some other market and make the sale because I can't get enough profit here. The chapter finishes talking about mobile commerce, and that's what the video was about. And even though it's a relatively small part of e-commerce today, it's the fastest growing part of e-commerce. So it's something that a lot of people are very interested in talking about. Like they talked about in the video, there's really a couple of different ways of talking about mobile commerce. There's the idea that you can make payments from your phone. You can log into websites, order products, and things like that. Or you can actually use your phone or PDA or whatever it is to actually make purchases directly. So you go to a Coke machine, you go to a restaurant or whatever, and you use your phone to make the payment. So it depends on how you want to look at it, what context that you're talking about as to what they're talking about when they say in a mobile commerce. Fraction of total e-commerce transactions revenue has been steadily growing. Different types of services, or the reason it works really well is location-based services, that you can do banking and financial things. So, for example, location-based services. Think about your cell phones today, your smartphones. A lot of them have GPS capabilities built into them. Now all of a sudden you can start to receive ads that, hey, there's a restaurant down here on the right that you like to go to all the time. Here's a 10% coupon or $5 off or whatever. You've already got your phone, so we know you can pay for it. Come on in. Wireless advertising and retailing, games and entertainment. You see, all phones, you can do everything that you can on a computer anymore. So growth in mobile commerce revenues, again, it's growing at a very steady pace, which given the general state of the economy, this is really a good thing. How do you build a website? Well, this is really a very, very, very brief introduction to something that's probably more than a single book, even a good book. Assembling a team with the skills required to make decisions about. You want to know about the technology. There's a lot of different technologies that you can use in terms of operating systems, the web server that you want to use, the scripting languages that you want to use. How do you want to design the sites? You may not think about that as a consumer, but there's a lot of different sites or designs to sites. For example, there's a hierarchical structure. There's a laid out structure where you go through a series of steps, which is typically what you see when you go through the payment process. There's combinations to sites. There's hodgepodge sites, which typically don't go over all that well because it's hard to navigate from one page to another. Social and information policies. Hardware, so what are you going to do with the data? And you have to kind of think about privacy policies and things like that, how you're going to interact with your consumers. You do have to think about that. If you don't, you end up in a situation like Facebook has been in for the last few years, where there's a lot of confusion about what they can and can't do with the information that they've accumulated. The hardware, software, and telecommunications infrastructure. Customer demands should drive the site's technology and design. Don't think, ooh, this is really cool, let's get that and figure out how to use it later. That's not how you run a business. Business decisions drive the technology, not the reverse. Business objectives, capabilities the site should have. So what is it that you want to have the site be able to do? You want it to be able to take orders and collect payment? Or are you just trying to use it as a way to reach customers and show them about the product so that they'll come into the store and make the purchase? You got to make that decision before you ever make the investment. So there's different stuff that you'll need. System functionality, technological capability to achieve this objective. So if you're going to collect payments, you've got to have some kind of shopping cart, right? It's just like if you go to a store, you get a cart, you pick it up, carry it around, and load it up with the things that you're going to purchase. That's what you're going to need if you're going to collect payments. And information requirements. If you're going to collect those payments, you've got to be able to encrypt things in some fashion. So again, it starts to tell, because these are the business requirements that you've established, it starts to now dictate the hardware and the software that you're going to have to purchase. So you make those business requirement decisions first, and then that will dictate what technology solutions you pick. How do you go about building a website? Well, you can do it completely in-house. What does that mean? What do you have to have if you do everything in-house?
Graphic design, marketing concepts,
Yeah.
programmer.
Yeah, programmers. You got to have physical space for the servers. You've got to, do everything. You're doing it in-house. You've got mixed responsibility, and you've got completely outsourced, where you're going to pay somebody else to do it. And which one's the right way to go? NBA answer. Depends. Website budgets. It can be really cheap to really expensive, depending on how complex the site's going to be. Again, it goes back to some of those objectives. If you are actually going to try to sell product, the price tends to go up. If you are just trying to get your name out there and advertise a little bit and show what kinds of products and services that you provide, a lot of that content can tend to be more static and not have to be updated as often. You can keep the prices down in a lot of cases. A lot of the money you spend is after the site is up and going. Don't fool yourselves. That's lots of people think, oh, well, it's only going to cost this much for the web developer program. We'll do that, and it's easy, right? Well, keeping it up and going, it can cost an awful lot of money. So I used to have a professor that said every problem could be evaluated in a 2x2 matrix, and sure enough, we end up with a 2x2 matrix here. So building the site versus hosting the site. We can either build the site and host it ourselves, so everything's internal. That means we have to have the technology, we have to purchase the technology, we have to have the people trained, we have to have the marketing people in place that know how to develop aesthetically develop a website and contact customers and work with customers. So we had to do all of that. We can actually outsource the building of the site, but still host it ourselves if we want. In other words, we still have the hardware on site. The advantage to that is we've got the actual site. So if the people that built it go out of business, that's not a problem. We'll have to get up to speed really quick on how to maintain the site, or we'll have to pay somebody else to maintain the site, but we physically have it on our server, so we're in pretty good shape there. We can host or pay somebody else to host the site, but build it ourselves. Hopefully in that type of environment, that means we have to have the expertise still to build it. But hopefully what that means is that this company that we're paying to outsource it, paying to host it, hopefully that means that's their profession. That's what they do. They're really good at it. So they've invested in servers that are high-end servers that are going to high availability. They're going to stay online. They have backup systems. They're going to have UPSs and things like that. So that if a storm rolls through, they're going to still be up and running. That's the idea behind that. Or you can completely outsource it. Have somebody else build it, have somebody else host it. Maybe it's the same company that's doing the building and the hosting, maybe it's not. But everything's external to your company. Certainly, if you don't have the individuals capable of building a site, you don't have the equipment to be able to do it, that's certainly an option. It's not one I particularly like, but it is certainly an option. You can keep costs down that way as well. It's definitely one way to do it. Components of a website budget. Where's the money going to go? What are you going to spend it on? A little bit on content design and development. It's actually a very important part of the whole process, but it doesn't garner the most of the money. Hardware, all those expensive servers, lots of money. It's only 10%. Software's cheaper, 8%. Telecommunications, so your broadband connections, 10%. Systems development, the process of starting to apply this, that's 22%. Why? Now you're paying those programmers and those coders and those database administrators to do what they do. And then the big chunk is the stuff that happens after the fact, after the site's up and running. Sites get old really quick, and again, if it's dynamic content, if it's stuff that's changing all the time, stuff will break. You will identify reasons to upgrade, reasons to make changes, and that's where all that comes in, is that maintenance, system maintenance. So that is e-commerce in a nutshell. I think it's one of the more interesting chapters. I don't know about you guys, but I kind of like that stuff. So. Any questions over the chapter or what's going on in the class?